Okay, so it's time for me to talk spoiler-filled video for Secret Project number 4, The Sunlit Man. The title of the book and the cover art are in the thumbnail now because officially Brandon and his team are using these things for promotional, so I'm just following his team's lead. That's why it's out there now. But if you don't want to hear spoiler thoughts, I did post a spoiler-free reading vlog last week where I talked about my general thoughts on it, spoiler-free. But this video is spoilers, so let's dig into spoilers. Like I said in the spoiler-free video, easily the best part about this book for me was the world. This world that's too close to the sun, and so you have this nomadic people that that live in floating cities with detachable airships that allow them to constantly be on the run. They have to keep moving every single day in order to outrun the sun rays so that they're not completely destroyed. Is such a fascinating concept. The way the sunlight affects the ecosystem versus the way it affects the people, and how the people have to live off of the ecosystem in this very different kind of way. He's so good at creating a world and a magic system and then thinking about the tiny little ways that that would affect daily life, the tiny little ways that human behavior, human thought has to, like the little ways that people would have to shift in order to work within this system. And I said this in my spoiler-free video, but so badly I wanted this book to just slow down and study, just do a human study on people that have to live in this way, this nomadic lifestyle, how it affects their relationships and their bonds and their detailed close interactions. I wanted to see some people that became like brothers, like this kinship, and other people that it turns them into this survival of the fittest kind of mentality, and how they worked against each other, and how I don't know, I just wanted to see the human side of it on a much deeper level because I was so fascinated by the world that I was like, show me the people and how this has shaped them. And Brandon did that. I'm not trying to say he didn't. I just wanted so much more of that. I wanted that to be the focus of the book. That's not me complaining. It's just me saying I was so fascinated by this world that I wanted an even deeper exploration of it and of the people in it. So again, that sounded more like I'm not complaining. I'm just saying it was so cool. I would have loved even more. Then you have the fact that we have, like I said in the spoiler free, we have this mystery, right? So like Nomad is here, he's world hopped, he's on this new world, he has to figure out what's going on in this world, how all of this works together, how to work within this magic system, how to help these people. He's on the run. Why are the Night Brigade chasing him? What are they? Who even is Nomad? Why is he on the run? And how all these things work together. And it was fun to have a man called Nomad who arrives on a nomadic civilization. It was fun to have a man who's on the run, and he arrives in a world of people who are constantly on the run from the sun rays. As well as the fact that Nomad, Sigzil, also has a torment. He held the Dawn Shard for a while, so he, just like Wit, it's really, really hard for him to harm anyone since it was a while ago, it was only for a short period of time. It's something that he can overcome, but it's difficult for him to commit any sort of violence in any capacity. And then what happens? He lands on a world where he's essentially required to work through that. And I like the dynamics that Sanderson did, which he always does, but it was right there for us, the dynamics between Nomad, the character, and his personal, what he's going through, and how it parallels with the world and what it's going through as well. Speaking of Nomad being put in a position where he has to directly confront the torment and how that affects his life, this was a really action-paced book. This was such an action-paced book. So I'm not a fast-paced plot kind of reader. I'm not saying I don't like it, it's just that I tend to connect with books that are a little bit more slow moving, books that are a little bit more, I just really like a slow character, a slow plod through character introspection. So boring of me, but that's what I like. So, which is probably why I'm not unique. I love Stormlight. Wow. You're here too? You do too? Shocker. Anyway, so this was very, very action-packed. This was a really quick story, and that was Sanderson's goal. He said in his note at the end that he wanted to see if he could do what he does in a really tightly paced story, which is interesting, I guess, just because it has to be Cosmere. But I feel like he's been doing that lately with books like Tress and Yumi especially, but those were far more Cosmere light than this one is. And Sanderson can write an action scene, and it was a lot of fun, and there was still plenty of room for some exploration of the magic and some self-reflection in the middle of all that, and he did a good job of keeping information coming to us and continuing to ask more questions and build the world and the story in the action. I think he did a good job with it. I just tend to prefer books that are a little bit less something big is happening every chapter, which is such a dumb thing to complain about. But it's not a complaint, it's just a preference. I'm just stating a preference. All that said, more things that I really enjoyed. I loved that Sigzil sounded like a totally different character. I did not recognize him. Obviously, I knew he was from Roshar. Obviously, he mentions Bridge 4. I knew he was from Stormlight. Like, yes. But as far as who exactly he was, I didn't figure it out. I think I figured it out way later than a lot of people did. And I think that's because he just didn't seem like Sigzil anymore. And I love that. I love that after hundreds of years of being on the run and going through everything that he went through, that his voice reflects that. He shouldn't sound like the same person. He should be distinctly different. And I love that about him. I love that his voice and it was like a more cynical, it was like a more cynical Hoyd or something like it was just, he seemed like a changed man, and it wouldn't work if he seemed like Sigzil, right? It is interesting that his journey was almost, it was like, okay, so what made Sigzil change so much? And we learned some of it, but there's still so many questions I have. And his arc was almost like getting back to the Sigzil that we once knew. Like we could see him starting to become himself again, which is a really interesting choice to take a character that we know, completely change him, and then try to restore him back to who we know and love. It was almost like regaining his voice again, which I think it hit me really well. Also, blending these magic systems together was done so well. I imagine that has to be extremely difficult to do, and they did. They blended together so well, and it was so cool to see that in action in this book. Also, the one thing that the secret projects, specifically the Cosmere ones, have given us, or given, us, is this wider view of the Cosmere. You know, we have these two planets that we're accustomed to being on and we've explored so much, but they feel so isolated in this wider universe. And to explore more of the universe in Mistborn and Stormlight would feel like they're already doing their own thing. It would feel very padded to somehow explore them. So using these secret projects, not only as a way for Brandon to test out new writing styles and to play with some tropes that he really wants to play with, and not only was it all of that, but it was also an opportunity for us readers to get a taste of what the rest of the Cosmere looks like, and to be able to expand that a little bit wider, to make the universe feel more alive and more living and breathing and expansive without bogging down the series that he's actively working on. Much the same with this being such an action-packed book, the Cosmere references were like a fire hose directly aimed at my face. It just, as far as the implications and the, okay, so what exactly is going on in Roshar, and how did we get to this point with Sigzil? What does this mean that Sigzil can take enough investiture? Why is that so hard to say out loud? In my head, it's so easy. From a Spren to keep it alive, but to not keep it itself. There's also that parallel of the Spren not being fully itself anymore, and Sigzil is a very different person than who we knew in Stormlight, which we'll come back to. But as far as the Cosmere connections go, as a reader personally, I really enjoy the Cosmere connections being Easter eggs and being implications, things that we can kind of pick at and say, oh, what does this mean for the wider Cosmere? Cosmere and look at that on a wider scale in the way that Sanderson has done it up to this point. In this book in particular, it was a lot, the plot itself and the character arcs themselves depended on the wider Cosmere knowledge. And for me personally, I really enjoy Cosmere connections. I enjoy being able to have these little Easter eggs in, but the Cosmere connections are not what I read Brandon's books for. I read them for the isolated stories and characters, and then I like that there's this overarching connection. In this book, it was, I think, more the Cosmere connections were more the story than the story was, if that makes sense. A wanderer comes into a new society that needs help, and because he's part of Bridge 4, because of who he is and who he's learned to be, he has to defend those that are weaker, those that can't defend themselves. So anyway, a wanderer comes in, sees a group of people that need help, he learns their cultures and their customs, helps them, and then rides off into the sunrise. I told my dad when he called me after he finished the book, he was like, it was so fun. It was like the old movies that I used to read or I used to watch growing up. I was like, it was like a Western? He goes, it was like a Western. It was like a Western. Actually, one of my patrons pointed this out to me. It was like Wizard's Guide handbook, just better. I guess let me put it this way. If you strip the Cosmere from the plot, then there's not a lot about the plot that is especially exciting. It becomes a lot more of a streamlined, simple, not a book to write home about. It's the Cosmere that makes the story more exciting. And since I don't read Sanderson for the wider Cosmere implications, I read him for the isolated stories and characters far more so. That kind of makes this an interesting book, a fun book, an amazing world, but a little bit less of a little bit lower in my rankings of the secret projects. Along with the plot feeling a little bit less unique, there were also things within the plot, things like them coming to certain conclusions a little bit too easily, or making progress a little bit too quickly for me. The Cinder King wasn't a villain to write home about. I think he did his job. He wanted his world domination. He was, you know, a force for us to work against, but, you know, that's all. Like when Sigil is using his radiant powers or rediscovering his oaths, those things weren't really explained in this book, so I'm not sure that stuff would have made sense if you didn't have a wider Cosmere knowledge. Or when Escadrial scientists use allomancy on him, or why they have an affinity for metal. These things, I think, weren't explained in the book in a way that could make this cohesive. It makes it so that these connections are more the story than the story itself is. Because the story itself, the plot itself, I think wasn't the best part about the book. There's a lot that I really, really enjoyed about this book as well, just also I have my negatives too. So some of the wider Cosmere connections, some of the things that really stood out to me. Something that I said on my Discord that we ended up disagreeing on. First of all, obviously Sanderson's really making us sweat as far as what Stormlight 5 is going to be. I already expected it to be a little bit, you know, devastating, but now I expect it even more. Oh, what is going on in Roshar? We have Sigil's remarks about the past and constantly referring back to Roshar, the Cinder King's opinion about all of it. There was a big emphasis on tyranny and conquest. Something clearly has gone wrong on Roshar, or is going to go wrong for us readers. I mean, Hoyd is forced to bring in an object, the Dawn Shard, that is designed to kill the god of the universe, so you know that it has to be something big. Now, this is where people have disagreed with me. A few people mentioned that the references to the conquest and all that happened on Roshar is more historical from what we already know and not talking about an event coming, but then other people said no, they also read it as like, watch out, Stormlight 5, something terrible is coming. So I'm curious to hear how you read that, because we kind of were split almost 50-50 on wondering if it was referring to past history Roshar or if it was referring to here comes Stormlight 5. So let me know how you read that. Also, while you're giving your opinions on things, I would love to hear your thoughts on the fact that Nomad was able to change his dead shard blade into any shape he wanted. That's not something that I was aware you could do up to this point, but really his relationship with his friend, there's a lot of things, like what I mentioned earlier about being able to keep his sprint alive, but not keep its self. Like, there's a lot of things I think that were revealed about the relationship you can have with a Sprin that I wasn't aware of previous. But also, I'm not a Cosmere expert. Like, I do not retain every detail of the Cosmere, so there may be things that I've just forgotten, so you can help me out if you know. I also wonder if whatever it is that led to Ox getting hurt is what kicked off Sigzil's spiral of abandoning his oaths and the Dawn Shard and everything that has led up to this point. Like, it seems like something horrible happened to Ox, and that is what started Sigzil down this path that makes him essentially unrecognizable. I don't know. I have a lot of questions that I'm sure will only be revealed in the upcoming Stormlight books, but Brandon did promise that we're not done with Sigzil. While he probably won't be a main character again, we definitely are getting more of him, which I'm super excited about because I really want that. I still have so many questions about how Sigzil got to where he is and what happened on Roshar and what's to come. So very, very excited to learn more about him. Again, there's so much that I enjoyed about this book, and there's so much of the Cosmere references that had my mind spinning. It's just, as I said, I don't read Sanderson's books exclusively for the Stormlight references, and I do think that not Stormlight, exclusively for the Cosmere references, and I do feel like the Cosmere references kind of carried this book. But I'm curious to hear what you think, because as I said, my dad did not feel that way. In fact, my dad is probably the least Cosmere aware Cosmere fan out there, just because his memory is horrible and he forgets everything. So he is like, yeah, I kind of remember Stormlight. This was a fun Western. Like, you know, it just, he's my dad. So even though he's forgotten most Stormlight things, he still loved the book, and there were certain things that he picked up on and he was like, ah, Bridge 4, and then other things that he's like, I don't know what you're talking about with the Dawn Shard, what does that even mean? Anyway, I'm very curious to hear how you took the book, how you enjoyed it. There's a lot to unpack with this book, and I know that even though I've been sitting here for a while, I feel like I barely scratched the surface, so please do continue to chat with me about it in the comments. For me, now that we're done with all four, oh, I guess I could give you a rating for this. It's like a 3.5 for me. Lots of pros, lots of cons, things that worked really, really well and things that didn't work quite as well for me. So yeah, it was good. I very much enjoyed it, but I also had plenty of things that didn't work perfectly for me. So for me, how I would rank the secret projects, it goes Tress, then Yumi, then Sunlit Man, and actually Tress and Yumi are near equal. They're almost on the same level. So Tress, Yumi, Sunlit Man, and then Wizards is at the bottom. Anyway, I would love to continue chatting with you about it in the comments. I post videos every Tuesday and Thursday on this channel, Mondays and Fridays on my other channel, which is always linked in the description. I'll see you again soon. Bye.